Okay, it's been a minute. It's been 2 years or so. Alright, that's fine. We'll make this work. My name is Daniel. I'm 34 years old. I'm a sometime administrator of the SCP Wiki, and I've been living with bipolar disorder for 20 years. A frolic through the enchanted meadow, this one promises to be not. It feels... I have a lot of feelings going on right now. Sitting here at the same desk where I recorded Cafe for, over 50 episodes. I don't know quite how many off the top of my head, but dozens and dozens, and ended up with, a pretty big fan base, and even, turned it into a little sideline. Lot of, well-wishers from various countries, all over the world. It was really pretty cool. The trouble with that is that it ties into some things that I have spent a long time not realizing were problematic. So let's start back at the beginning. Welcome to SCP Cafe. This is 2022, week 17. I'm your host, Blue Soul, retired SCP Wiki administrator. I gave a lot of responsibilities back after, you kind of saw it if this isn't your first exposure to the show. I really struggled for a while. And what's funny in hindsight is that I fully, I knew what the struggle was going to be like before I did it. Before I experienced it, I knew, because it was sort of a familiar set of circumstances. I didn't have the vocabulary at the time to describe what was going on in my head. I would have these periods that were very creative, and I felt very inspired, and I would do a lot of stuff, stay up late working on things, knock out a ton of stuff in a really short amount of time. All these things that, people really, respected and admired and praised me for, and it felt great. This is not new behavior on my part, but there were a lot of things I didn't realize, and, the world ended, if you didn't notice, back in 2020. Everything went to hell at, kind of at once. But COVID coincided with finally getting some mental help. So I've been seeing a psychiatrist now for, I guess it has been 2 years. A little over. So we finally got to explore some things that I had not had the opportunity to, and I think a lot of that was my environment growing up. We didn't talk about mental health. There wasn't any support for any of that, even though it would have been really beneficial. I think I've mentioned here on previous shows, I feel like I'm almost positive I have. My mom died when I was 17, and I, never saw a counselor, never, spoke to anybody about it. I just sort of internalized it and compartmentalized it and, went on with my life. I didn't find out until after my dad died, which we talked about on this show back in June of 2020, I think, or maybe June of 2019. But in any event, I found out after he died that he ended up seeing a psychiatrist, and he'd actually been getting psychiatric meds for years, and it was still felt off limits to me. So I finally got to, put out there some of the stuff that I'd been dealing with and didn't have names for. And we started trying to, you know, solve some problems. We came away with a number of diagnoses, really. Post-traumatic stress disorder around the accident that I am also positive I've made mention of on here. Generalized anxiety disorder. Major depressive disorder was the initial diagnosis for, the lows that I've been dealing with for as long as I can really remember. My mom had cancer, and basically from 9 years old onward, I had a pretty fucked up childhood. So, in exploring these things and coming away with diagnoses, we start trying to solve the problems, and with medication. And ADHD, which doesn't really present in a lot of people in the way that I had in my head that ADHD looked like. It doesn't look anything like that, but we ended up kind of going through that whole worksheet of, okay, do you experience these things? Yeah, well, it's not what you think of when you think of ADHD, but it's classified right here. Here, try and take some medicine. Try and take, this methylphenidate. Well, as it turns out, I can't tolerate much of any medication, which has been a huge pain in the ass. My first experience with any sort of psychiatric meds, I ended up with terrible diarrhea for 2 hours, and it was almost to the point where I was like, okay, if one more time, and I'm going to the ER, and the one more time never came, thankfully. So that hasn't gone well overall. We have figured out a few things. We figured out I can tolerate very low doses of Adderall. We figured out I can tolerate fairly low doses of an anti-anxiety drug called buspirone. And after 2 years of chasing down something to deal with depression, because I have not been able to tolerate a single solitary one of them, we found one called mirtazapine that is actually, it's kind of an ideal thing for folks that can't tolerate your typical SSRIs, your Zoloft and Lexapro and that sort of thing. So here I am on mirtazapine, and I am presently in the middle of a hypomanic episode. My psychiatrist and I have been arguing about this for a while, on the diagnosis of bipolar disorder. So let me back up for a minute, because bipolar doesn't look, it's like ADHD, it doesn't look the way that I thought it looked. I thought bipolar, it's another one of these words, people use to justify some behavior that they have, or they wake up in a bad mood sometimes, and they just shrug it off. They'll put that out there, into the universe. I'm, just having a bipolar day. It's not really how it works, I have found. What I had in my head was that bipolar was, I only really thought of manic episodes, and I thought of them in terms of folks that were on a coke bender, just up for days and doing, like doing a bunch of drugs and whatever. And so, and that actually is the case for one type of bipolar disorder. It's the typical, sort of the original classic diagnosis, such that it's called bipolar 1. There also exists bipolar 2, and this is where things get interesting for me. What they have in common, bipolar 1 and 2, are that they alternate between highs and lows, right? Your bipolar depression, as opposed to monopolar depression, which is lows and normalcy. Bipolar, you have a low, and then you might end up in sort of an even keel mode for a little while, and then you keep going, and you end up to, on the high side, and this is what's called a manic episode. So bipolar 1, that's exactly what happens. You have these manic episodes, and they go for maybe a week, maybe 10 days, and they are sort of that classic stereotype, if you will, up for days, really reckless living, and that tends to be severe enough that many people end up, voluntarily admitting themselves to the hospital if they feel it coming, and they're not in a position to do anything about it. Bipolar 2, in contrast, the highs are shorter, they're less severe, and the lows are longer and, in many cases, lower than bipolar 1. So what does a high look like if it's not a manic episode? Well, they call this hypomania, and what this is characterized by is not so much the up for days and days, but you will probably be able to go without rest, with less rest, I suppose. And you have, the books call it delusions of grandeur, which always was, it was also like that wording felt very like, whoa, like that's a bit much. Like, I'm not dealing with that. What I have instead are these, I'll have these ideas where I want to, start a project, and I want to, I want to run a podcast. I want to build a website. I want to start a band or further my music creation, and, generally do things to make me rich and famous. Well, that's kind of a fucking delusion of grandeur, isn't it? Turns out, yeah. I didn't realize that. And when we put that together, I told my psychiatrist this, like, I can think of, okay, every December, like October and December, I am like driven to start some new project. I can pretty much set my watch to it in like, mid to late December. And it is a pattern of mine, and I started going through old blog posts of mine and old notes on my computers and and digging through old hard drives for stuff that is no longer on the internet. This is a pattern of behavior that I could reliably trace back to the year 2002. So I feel like this is proof enough to, go to my psychiatrist and say, hey, doesn't this make sense? Isn't this bipolar 2? And the response has been very consistent. No, not quite, because bipolar 2 is characterized by more than just this. One of the things that we look for is that you live very recklessly, that you spend a lot of money, or you start doing drugs, or you start, like cheating on your spouse or something like that. And so I told her, like, this is definitely a point in time where I find myself spending more money. I put it in the context of, it's an investment in this project, or sometimes it's completely unrelated. And I, will spend hundreds, thousands of dollars on stupid bullshit. And I'm apparently not crossing some threshold of hers because I have the wherewithal, the composure to not let myself do all of the things that my brain is telling me to do. Like, because I want to and don't do it, that puts it on the wrong side of a diagnosis. And so it's like, do I go ahead and just do it? Like, should I just go start doing drugs? Will that, will you listen to me then? Like, because that seems a bit self-destructive if I can keep away from it, just through presence of mind and willpower. It's certainly not that I don't want to do these things. So, what the hell does any of this have to do with Cafe? Why am I recording this? Well, as it turns out, STP Cafe was started in mid-December of 2018. It was another one of those, winter projects. I always just thought of them as winter projects, and they coincided with, like, okay, now's the time where I do a bunch of stuff, and I get, really invested, and I do all these things, and the happy brain chemicals are all there. They're all firing. So that was something I actually didn't put together until about 5 minutes ago. Literally while I was recording this, that this is another one of those projects. Like, not just that it was one of these bipolar projects, because I know that now, but the timing even matches up, and I forgot that I started this in late December of 2018. The fact is, right now, I think the antidepressant is probably pushing me too far in the wrong direction, because the last 2 days have been more and more like where I can't really stop myself from taking on these big projects and like really just jumping in and doing a bunch of stuff. And yesterday I like justified all of it with, oh, well, things are slow at work, and I've got the time, and I want to spend the time to improve, my technical skills, which is fine. That might even be valid. But, it continued on today, and then into the night, I was in the shower thinking about expanding this old project and, doing all of these things. And it goes back to the same concept of notoriety, and it's very dangerous for me. The reason that it's dangerous is because, and this is very much, out of the all the textbooks on bipolar 2 with these hypomanic episodes, you take on all of these responsibilities and projects because you feel, totally capable and composed and able to do quite literally anything. And you take it on, and for several days you're able to do it, and you're functioning at an incredibly high level, and then it stops. And the only thing that can keep me going a lot of times once that, once those good vibes wear off, is inertia. And longtime listeners of this show can, tell you that I was very consistent getting something out every week, and then when my schedule was stretched, I I sort of gave myself an out as far as, okay, but it's still like, even if it's not that week, it must be done before the next week is completed, and you need to get 2 shows out at that point. And the inertia is what allowed that to work. I flat out told listeners that if that I know myself well enough that when my dog was really not doing well, I told you guys, if I stop, if I take a break to do, to deal with, all of this craziness happening in my house right now, I will not be able to continue. And that is exactly what happened. The inertia was no longer there, and then comes all of the guilt, all of the self-loathing, and all of the negative energy starts coming in. But sure enough, I called it. We went 2019 week 45, 46, 47, 48, 50, and that was it until the following May. And at that point, I was grasping for straws. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know. I just felt completely and utterly drained and overwhelmed, and just the anxiety. I didn't expect, that the anxiety would still be building after all that time. From, we went almost a year straight. We did 2018 week 51 to 2019 week 48. And, in hindsight, I kind of regret not being able to make it work for that week 49. So I could, say I did 52 straight weeks. But that was it, man. Like, I was done, and I felt so bad and so crushed and afraid, anxious. I didn't want to see what was going on. Like, there's some expectation, some demand there that I can no longer meet. Now, in hindsight, this is corresponding with, like, starting this thing on a high, continuing through with a bunch of inertia, and then, like, my dog not being well had me really fucked up. And I was in a real low, and that triggers all of the anxiety, all of the other stuff. But by 2019, week 48, I didn't have that knowledge. I had no idea. I had not talked to a psychiatrist. I hadn't done any of that. I just knew, and I knew myself well enough that as soon as that inertia is not there, man, we're probably done. And that was what happened. So looking at it now, with fresh eyes, albeit I don't trust myself entirely at the moment, I think, Cafe was ambitious. I think it did a lot of good things. I genuinely wanted to put the spotlight on writing and new articles, because the fact is, when you look at how SCP is consumed at this point in time, there's video games, there's, stuff on YouTube, there's the subreddit, and none of it, it's a lot of it is about old stuff from people that man, they don't work here anymore. Like, we've collectively written probably 10,000 articles since, this one that you're making reference to. Like, give me a fucking break. I don't know what the best thing I ever did for the wiki is, but I do know what the worst thing I ever did for the wiki is, and that was sort of giving the reins of the SCP subreddit over with the and this is, and like, not to slight the guys that took it on, but that the inclusion of memes was like almost immediate, and the signal to noise ratio just immediately took a shit. And it's, and don't get me wrong, like, the subreddit was never great. I'm not claiming that things were good, in any objective manner, when I was running it. But for a project that is, at its core about creative writing, I don't think anything, in a modern context, stifles creativity as much as memes do. When you take a format like the SCP Foundation, where things are voted on, and you have a subreddit where the visibility of what you see is based on what people vote on, when that visibility is no longer because of quality writing, but instead it's because this image or this meme connected with the most people because it was very accessible. It cross-referenced something that, everybody was aware of. That, the fact is, for, authors, like, authors collectively are like, addicts, man. They're at it for votes. They're at it for recognition. They're at it for notoriety, with very few exceptions. Not to say they don't exist. They do exist. There are people that flat out say, I'm writing this for myself. This article says exactly what I want it to say. And frankly, I don't give a rat's ass if you like it or not. I didn't write it for you. There aren't a lot of those people around anymore. If I had a really, low budget genie that only let me affect things on the wiki, and its connected universe, if you will. If I had a really cut rate genie and that was all it let me make a wish on, I would love to see, maybe it's the Reddit, because that's where I spend, the most time out of the social media platforms. Maybe it's somewhere else, but somewhere where the articles themselves are dissected and really, really given their credit for being good writing, not just for being relatable or, being something that you got the reference to. And like, don't misconstrue this for me, like, saying that it was any other way in the past. You can look at the Internet Archive for like pre-Wikidot at the edit this wiki, and back then it was, much the same. There was always pop culture references. There were always, like, if we if we deconstruct a meme to like a unit of information that is, easily conveyed, then yeah, it's been around forever. But I would love to see I'd like to see a greater appreciation for truly effective and harrowing horror writing, and not have authors feel in the back of their head like this is not like this isn't going to land with the readers because, well, they like things that they can turn into memes. Those, like, that's a reality of it. Um, and it's not just the wiki. Like, don't get me wrong. You can look at video games. You can look at, I mean, this is just kind of internet influencer shit at this point, right? Um, so, I know this sounds kind of like old man yells at cloud, and that's not my intention. I just wish there was a way that, you know, that there was a current, popular, visible, like, somewhere that really does celebrate the writing for being good writing, and that's just really hard on the internet in kind of what it looks like right now. And I don't really think that's anybody's fault. If I had tried to like rule the subreddit with an iron fist, well, fucking, I don't have time for that, and I, it wouldn't have worked. Especially, the growth has been, it's been crazy. When I first took over our SCP, it had, I want to say, 8,000 subscribers. And right now, it has 634,405 people on it. There are more people actively browsing the subreddit at this very moment, which is the middle of the fucking night on a Friday, than there were total subscribers when I, took it over. So, yeah, no, it was never gonna, like, getting it the exact way that I envision is probably impossible. Or at the very least, very, very difficult without a very large team that also had the exact same vision that I did for the place. And that was never the case. So, it sucks. I wish things had played out a bit differently on that front, because that was really, the goal. Once I had a goal, because at first this whole thing was just a fucking, bipolar, like, go 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 podcast business. I in hindsight now, it's fucking crazy. Like, I went from, oh, this sounds like something I want to do, to, okay, I registered, I got a registered LLC with the state of New Mexico. I bought like $2,000 worth of various like recording equipment and all the merchandising equipment. I just told myself, yeah, I'll learn how to run screen printing, or a t-shirt, like heat press, heat transfer vinyl. I'll buy a vinyl cutter. I'll buy a badge printer. I bought all of that. I opened a bank account. I did all this shit in like 2 days, and launched the website. Recorded, did all the reading, did the first episode. It's insanity, and I still don't know how a normal person approaches these things from like a level-headed perspective and just does it day in and day out. I have no idea how that person, operates. It doesn't make a lick of sense to me. So I want to apologize for, not for not recording any more episodes, because you weren't owed that, and not for not making any more merchandise, because you weren't owed that either, and not for stopping my work as an administrator on the wiki, because you also weren't owed that. What I want to apologize for is not, coming clean and just having an open and honest conversation with, listeners folks on the website and so on that this is what I'm dealing with. I got, a lot of anxiety right now, and I can't do this, and I don't know when I'll be able to do it. I couldn't have that moment because it was scary, and not having it is worse, right? Like, you just end up where people are like, hey, what happened to Blue Soul? Like, where is he? He was supposed to be around. And then you see those conversations, and it's like your heart drops into the pit of your stomach. It's like, oh fuck, oh no. And then the anxiety's worse, and then it's like, well, now I can't, like, I don't want to confront this. Like, isn't that the fucking weakest thing you've ever heard in your fucking life? I mean, give me a break. But it's the truth. It's what I've dealt with most vividly in my memory in college, where I all the good happy brain chemicals hit. I was getting away from home. I'm out in a new town. I went to the University of Louisville, and I signed up for fucking everything. I did the student council. I did their the freshman leadership council. I did the Louisville's version of a pep squad thing they called the L Raisers. I went Greek. I pledged a fraternity. I went, I did student council for the College of Engineering, and started a web project at the same time, and all of this stuff. And as it turns out, and by the way, I had no concept of a fucking organizational system when I was 18. Like, what's that? Like, I don't need that. And because, I went to, high school in, the middle of nowhere, and I could skate by without doing anything, and in hindsight, they'd have never, ever, ever failed me, because that hurts their bottom line too badly to do it. And I could have just probably done nothing my senior year, but that's, getting off topic. I had this back then, and it was so bad that I missed basically the last 7 or 8 weeks of college. Just straight up, ghosted. And this is my first time away from home, feeling like, oh shit, I've ruined my life. And it was bad, man. It was really, really unpleasant. And and some of that happens every time that I commit to a big project and, get going, get invested, and then, the good, happy brain chemicals start to dry up, and, you've got all the commitment and none of the motivation and all the anxieties, shortly thereafter. So it's a brutal cycle, man. It really is. So I apologize for not having that presence of mind and ability to do the right thing, because I think it is the right thing to do in the moment. I just didn't have it, and for that I'm sorry. What I'm figuring out these days is knowing when these feelings are coming and trying to sort of let them go by without acting on them. And that's difficult. It's proven to be, it's like effective, but there's, sort of some baggage attached, because now it's like I don't feel like I'm accomplishing anything. And I haven't really come to terms or come to, like, I don't know. I haven't figured out the best approach for dealing with that. But at least these days, I feel like I've got a better chance than I ever have. So I figure, in addition to the apology, you guys probably deserve a sort of an update, sort of a, you know, little check-in as to how I'm doing. Which, if you haven't gathered, it's been it's been kind of a mixed bag, right? But I'm still holding down a steady job, and actually, doing pretty damn well at it. My dog Munchkin unfortunately did die, back about 3 months ago, which feels like an eternity. Like, these last 3 months have felt really weird, because this has been, the point in time where I've really come to understand what bipolar is and starting to treat it. I do have a new pet. I have an Amazon parrot named Rio, and he's cool. He's about a year old, and he very much enjoys biting me and otherwise chewing on me, and he likes just getting into everything and exploring the world, and it's actually kind of cool to, just have this perspective of seeing, this very inquisitive and very intelligent bird. You can give him literally anything, just at hand, and he'll start to play with it. He'll start to, he'll pick it up, he'll look at it this way and that, and he'll, determine, what he makes of it, and we'll get these little puzzles for him, and just watching him solve these things is really cool to see. So, and he seems quite happy with the setup. He was also a bipolar purchase, perhaps. That was several $1,000s for not just the bird, but also all the supplies to, give them a good life. And thankfully, I didn't just come home with, with hey, I spent $5,000 on, on this bird. Here, hold him. I got to bring the cage in. Oh, by the way, you can fit a 5.5 foot tall, 4 foot wide cage in a 2016 Toyota Prius. Albeit it won't ever be quite the same after, and some of the trim pieces are going to be a little mangled beyond salvage, but it can be done. So yeah, we got the bird, still married. It'll be 10 years in October. Been kind of letting some of my other hobbies and interests kind of take a back seat. Like, I was big into pro wrestling, I was big into video games, and I've kind of put both of them down for a little bit because I've been so focused on my professional development, which is cool to me outside of work because I'm a huge nerd, and that is just kind of who I am. But part of me is is this really healthy? I don't know. Wish I knew, but I don't. So, if you've made it this far, please, for the love of God, find a hobby, go pet your dog, hug your spouse, go do something, okay? Because while I'm humbled, but you got better things to do than listen to this, really. That is about all I feel like saying at the moment. And, well, I suppose it's been enough. We're coming up on 45 minutes here. But this has been an interesting feeling coming back to this place and getting these things off my chest that I didn't know for the better part of 20 years were my reality. But I guess it just kind of goes to show that you never really have all the answers. Even when you think you have an understanding of the situation, you have your understanding of the situation, and sometimes that is connected to the objective outside understanding of the situation very loosely. Um, I feel like I recorded this partly, in significant part because I want to kind of normalize talking about this stuff. Like, man, I can't help that I'm dealing with, you know, what I think is bipolar, what my, psychiatrist remains to be convinced on. But whatever it is, I'm dealing with it. I, you know, I suppose I can be apologetic about it, but it doesn't change anything. This is who I am. This is what's really going on. So I, want that to be something that more people are able to do. To just say, yeah, I've been dealing, I've had ADHD for as long as I can remember. A lot of folks can't, like, they're so uncomfortable talking about that, particularly at work. Like, do you know what sort of stigma is attached around adult ADHD in the workplace? It's crazy. It's the same sort of, like, I feel kind of pissed that out of all the stuff that out of the hand that I could have been dealt, the stuff that I'm dealing with are maybe the three of the most, like, just sort of shrugged off and, used their name without understanding the actual, like, disorder. PTSD, ADHD, bipolar. Really the only other one that I put in that tier of, like, made light of and the reality is really, terrible, is OCD. And I hope that, and I mean, if any of this resonated with you, with, maybe you or somebody has dealt with the same sort of thing. Like, I went 20 years, like I said, without knowing, like, this stuff has a name, and it actually has a pretty well-defined set of, symptoms and experiences you may have already had. And you don't know, until somebody tells you. You just kind of live life as this is my baseline. I don't know what other people experience. Like, I only have my own experiences to go by, and I assume they're normal. And as time has gone on, I have come to understand that much of my experience is not normal, but that doesn't change that it's who I am, and I'm not, I wasn't consulted on it, so I don't feel particularly, like apologizing for it, That's all I got. Have a good night, have a good morning, have a good rest of your day. But please, please, go find something better to do. Goodbye.